Today I want to go through every single cymbal that I own and give you a quick review and sound demo. I recently saw a video with a videographer that did this with their lenses, and they kind of went through each one and talked about why they had it and what they felt about it, and I really liked the format and thought it might be cool to translate to cymbals. So let's get into it. First up are the Meinl Byzance 14-inch sand hats. I think these were the first Meinl cymbals that I ever got. I long ago had a full set of Zildjians and got interested in Meinl via Mike Johnston, who will come up a couple times in this video. And the first set that I wanted to get were the 14-inch sand hats. And I used to use these all the time. I don't use them that much anymore, and I think it's more just because I don't use 14s that much these days, more than I don't really like the sand hats. They have a really heavy bottom hat and a very light top hat to give it a unique sound, and I would say that they are relatively versatile, but they do have a distinct characteristic that I don't always want when I'm recording. But I still think that they're great cymbals and they're really fun to play. Next up is the 18-inch Meinl Byzance Sand Thin Crash, and this is probably my favorite cymbal, and ironically, I really don't use it that much anymore, again, because I tend to use larger cymbals these days. I don't really use 18s much anymore, but this has just become the sound of a crash, just what a crash should sound like in my mind. And you can see this one is old. It's got all sorts of oxidation marks on them. I've probably had this for over 10 years now, and fortunately it's stuck with me the entire time, has not cracked, unlike a couple of the other cymbals. But this one I think is great for the bell sound. I think it's great to crash on. I think it's great to ride on. You can make giant 18-inch hi-hats with this and another cymbal. So this, just for nostalgic reasons and because I actually like how it sounds, this is probably my favorite cymbal of all. This next one is actually a Meinl prototype cymbal. This is a 16-inch sand thin crash, and I can't remember if they make these officially now, but this was an unofficial one that was made for Mike Johnston, whose camp I attended, well, many times in the past, but I got this one probably when I was like 16 or 17, and he was, if I remember correctly, in the process of switching from Paiste to Meinl, and Meinl had been sending him prototypes and a lot of different cymbals. They had sent him this, and he didn't need it anymore, or wasn't gonna work for his purposes, and I was just commenting on it, and he just said, "You want it?" And it blew my mind, because especially at that age, you know, I really did not have access to nice cymbals, and you know, everyone else in the camp was freaking out, like, "Oh my god, dude, that's insane." So yeah, he just gave me this 16-inch prototype crash, which I don't use that often. I'm kind of scared of breaking it, but it sounds killer, and it works really, really well as a top hi-hat. So the next one here is a sad story. This is an 18-inch Meinl Byzance Extra Dry Thin Crash, and it's got all this tape on it because I've been using it as like a stacker slash hi-hat. Because this one got cracked, you can kind of see here we tried to route out the crack, but I used this as my main crash for years and years and years, and then there was a fateful show where a guitar player went to do the cool guitar player headstock thing and hit the cymbal, like, you know, hit the cymbal with the guitar headstock, hit this cymbal, and after that show it was cracked. So I can't say for sure whether it was the guitar headstock that cracked it, or maybe I just happened to crack it that night and it was unlucky timing, but you know, that's what happens in battle sometimes. So anyways, this is a cracked cymbal, and I use this with this 18-inch Meinl Byzance dual crash. This was also a prototype at the time that I bought it. I got this from Memphis Drum Shop before they were making the dual crashes. Of course, they're easy to get now, but this was one of the like sort of prototypes, and unfortunately, this one cracked as well. I don't have anyone else to blame on this one, and I really, really rarely crack cymbals, so this one was just unlucky. However, I do use it now sometimes as a pair of really funky hi-hats with this other 18, or sometimes I'll kind of put them together and make sort of like a stacker hi-hat sort of thing.
Next up is the Meinl Byzance 21-inch transition ride, and this was one of the first batch transition rides that ever came out. So the story is that when Mike Johnson switched over to Meinl, suddenly I became very interested in Meinl, and I wanted an extra dry ride, but I wanted one that was a 21-inch, and I also wanted one that had a little more wash to it. I know, ironic, because it's the extra dry ride. And I found a prototype. I think this was also a Memphis drum shop prototype. Oh no, it was from Cymbals Only. Yeah, it was from the site Cymbals Only that looked like it was developed in 1999 and had all of these really, really cool cymbal prototypes direct from the manufacturers. So I got it off of that site and I really, really liked it, and that was my ride for a while. And Mike actually came up to Alaska, where I was living and growing up, and did a clinic, and he played that ride of mine. He really liked it too, and he said, he's like, oh, I've actually been looking for the exact same thing in Meinl. So he played that ride, and then soon after, they started working on the transition ride. They started going back and forth, he and Meinl, on what would eventually become this. Now, this is a much cooler ride and a much better design than the one that I had. The one I had didn't have this really fine lathing on the bottom, so this is a very different cymbal than that one was. But I knew that as soon as it came out that I was going to want this ride because I had wanted the exact same thing. So I love this one in particular. It's not perfect for every situation, but it has a killer bell, it crashes pretty well, and it has a unique voice for sure. Okay, I may have lied before. I think this one actually might be my favorite cymbal. This is the Meinl Byzance 22-inch sand crash ride with rivets, or at least it used to have rivets, because if you play this long enough and if you really crash it hard, those rivets will pop out. And this one has a little chunk taken out of it because it started to crack as well. I swear to God, I really don't crack cymbals that often. I know it kind of seems like there's all these cracked cymbals in my stories, but this one still sounds killer. I don't play this one that much anymore. I used to play it all the time, which is probably why it eventually wore out and cracked. But I play it sparingly now because I want to save it, because it just sounds so good, and it has loosened up over time, and the pitch has dropped to a point where most of the new ones don't really sound as deep as this one. So really, really killer ride and an amazing kind of finisher crash. So into some of my more recent stuff and more normal sounding stuff. This is the Meinl Byzance 19-inch medium thin crash, and I did a whole video on this one on it being the best crash in the world, at least to my ears. This is just a really normal sounding cymbal, but I just think it sounds amazing. I don't really have anything else to say other than it's just a killer sounding crash. Similarly, this Meinl Byzance Brilliant 20-inch medium crash is one that I picked out very particularly because this one sounds a lot deeper than the other crashes of this type. This is really just meant to complement this 19-inch crash. The pitches, I think, complement each other well, and this is one that's just supposed to be a little bit lower, but work really well with that other crash. This guy, the 22-inch Big Apple Dark Ride, is another one of my favorite cymbals. Not because it's super useful or because I use it all the time. I got this one just because
I personally love the way it sounds. It's just so smooth, and it's great in a jazz context. It doesn't work that well for a lot of the music that I'm usually playing, but just for my own personal playing and practicing, I just love the sound of this ride. This ride, on the other hand, does work in quite a lot of situations, and this is kind of meant to be my brighter and more normal sounding ride. This is the Byzance 22-inch Tradition ride, and this one I picked out very particularly. Not all of the Tradition rides sound quite like this one, and like I said, it's just supposed to sound like a normal ride. The bell isn't amazing on it, but the bow and just the regular cymbal and crash sound on it, I think are very smooth and work in a wide variety of situations. These hi-hats I actually have used the most in the past few years since I've gotten them, and they are in fact two crashes. It's a 16-inch medium thin crash and a 16-inch extra dry thin crash. And again, this is when I was working at the drum shop and we got a huge shipment of cymbals, and I got to really comb through them and find ones that I thought worked well together. I think I took every single 16-inch crash into a room and tried every combination until I found these two that worked really well together. And they work really well in both ways. You can have the extra dry on top, or you can have the traditional one on top, and you'll get slightly different sounds that work for different scenarios. So I love these 16-inch crash hi-hats. And finally, the odd ones out. I just got these recently. These are the 13-inch Zildjian KZ hi-hats that I just made a video on, if you saw that. It's the classic 13-inch KZ combo, the Z Dino beat, and it's not really my style for the sort of thing that I normally do, but they worked really well for a project I did recently, and it's good to have something that is sort of the polar opposite to my 16s for scenarios that require it. Okay, so that was a lot of cymbals, and if you stuck around to the end, thank you. I really appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Which ones did you like out of any of them? And of course, I would love to see your cymbals as well. If you make any sort of similar video, drop that down in the comments, and I'd love to watch your review of all of your cymbals. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.